So my name is Ryan Taylor. I work for Transposit. I have the longest title you will ever see on a slide, so I win that. I am going to be talking about operational maturity. Who would have thought a person that has that title would have anything to do with operational maturity? I actually ran production ops for Hulu. And so a little bit of this is just experience. This isn't a presentation in the traditional sense, it's a story. It's kind of what we walked into, it's how we became better as a result of that. And so it's more a story. I'm gonna open it up for questions as well. So, obviously, digital services have reached criticality, right? Sure they have. You can open Google right now, you can search Facebook outage, you can search Netflix outage. Companies that we associate with doing this very, very, very well still have failures. And so Hulu was no exception in this. When I started at Hulu, and I'll tell some stories. When I started at Hulu, one of the things that I noticed was that people had a swarm mentality, but it was by team. So oftentimes they were troubleshooting something that was affecting another service, but the other service was also troubleshooting. Had no idea the dependencies on each other, or where one was failing and the other one was also failing as a result of that. And so ultimately, Hulu had a problem. When I started at Hulu, we had about 6 hours of downtime per month. For a media streamer, that's quite a bit. Your competition is cable television. Or over-the-air TV. You turn on the TV, what you want to watch is on. If it's not, that's a huge problem. So for someone like Hulu, customers pay for uptime. We paid for downtime, and we paid for it big. Twitter was huge. If you went to watch your favorite show and it was unavailable on Hulu, we would see thousands of interactions on Twitter. So you can imagine like the pressure of uptime, availability. So when we start to talk about that, cost of downtime for large enterprises has gone up. It's $3,000 or $300,000 per hour, and it's also increased. I wish I had a clicker right now, by the way. Increase in service incidents that have affected customers, and incidents are taking longer to resolve as well. One full-time engineer building custom in-house tools and bots for automation, and then you have all the tools are not integrated in their platform, and then increasing focus on SRE practices. And SREs that have cited decrease or no change because they implemented automation. And of course, here's the bigger problem, right? You have cultural problems, and that's really what I'm gonna talk about today because culture was a problem at Hulu. Again, I've already told you we kind of swarmed, but we swarmed in silos. We didn't work well together. We also had a bunch of manual comms practices, right? So one person was opening a Jira ticket, another person was opening a Slack channel, another person was doing, we didn't have any of the automated communication pieces. We also had multiple systems of records. So we had Jira, we had ServiceNow, we had Salesforce, we had a whole customer team that was actually doing something in tools that we had never even heard of, 5 nines. It was like absolutely the Wild West when it came to that. And then of course, we had no dev resources. And when I say no dev resources, I mean, when you talk about like old school, you have an operations team and you have a development team. And the development team does handle operations for their tools, the things they're building. But our ops team was kind of in the excuse me, in the dark. They had no idea. And so we also had a dev resource stream. We didn't have a developer arm in the operations team that made our jobs easier. So I've given this presentation multiple times. I did it at Hulu. And what's interesting, when can I get a water or something? Sorry, guys. I'll continue talking. So when we started at, steal this real quick. When we were doing operational maturity at Hulu, one of the problems was, sorry guys. I'm gonna grab one of these I am so sorry. I have cotton mouth so bad I can barely talk. A moment of weakness there. Thanks for your patience. So, we had an operational maturity problem. Operations was a team, it wasn't a responsibility. And so what happened was, that's the ops team's problem. The ops team will take care of that. Well, ops is not a team, it's a responsibility of everybody in the organization. We were not present at every stage of the product lifecycle. As we were building new services, sunsetting old services, launching new products, operations wasn't involved. You heard someone earlier say, Dev was throwing those things over the wall. That's exactly what was happening. We built it, you run it. A big part of it was we needed to decouple incidents from failure. We needed to take a minute and say, look, we're gonna fail. It's accepted. We know we're gonna fail. What do we do as a result of that? So failure was decoupled from the incident. We accepted failure and did the firefighting. We had several stages of operational maturity. So you've heard some names dropped. You've heard John Allspa. You've heard Chef. You've heard Datadog. You've heard some of these vendors. I happened to work at Hulu at a time when the former founder of Chef was the CTO. Barry Steinglass, the current CISO of Datadog. Amelia was head of our security. Guess what? They have opinions. Surprise. You know, they had a way that they wanted to operate. And so as I was starting to go through this, I was like, I needed something to change. Unfortunately, I needed a huge incident. That's what I needed, that's what I required. And Hulu launched live television, which is the reason I was brought in the first place. When we launched live TV, the big thing is Super Bowl. It's the most watched live sporting or event, period. And we had launched in beta. We were gonna do a Super Bowl. And we did a lot of planning, scale-wise, resiliency-wise. Like, I would say that we were looking towards operational maturity, doing war rooms, kind of going through all of the incidents that we had had. Let's make sure we don't drop the ball on this one. We dropped the ball on that one. With about 3 minutes left in the Super Bowl, we lost the stream, period. So people who were tuning into the Super Bowl could not watch the Super Bowl. As you can imagine, pretty stressful day anyway. Last 3 minutes of the Super Bowl, black. It's like the worst thing that can happen in a live television experience is a black screen, and for 3 minutes. If it felt bad for the customer, man, that black screen, I literally was just overwhelming. So we actually needed to go through this, and this is kind of our journey. The thing that happened was the failure in the Super Bowl. Once that happened, conversations changed. The difference between wanting to participate in an incident and resolving an incident, two different things. Urgency. One of the things I tell people about Hulu, they had a ton of tools, and they were all internal tools. They were very great. The one thing I'll say about Hulu, engineers' mean time to acknowledge and actually engage on an incident was sub 3 minutes. It's world class. I'd never worked anywhere before or after. Literally, that meant like on average, they would acknowledge a PagerDuty page and be hands-on keyboard within 3 minutes. Phenomenal. So we didn't have to fix that, but we did have to fix like our reactive nature to things. So Super Bowl was one of those things. Customers were our monitoring. There's a lot of websites that you can obviously go to see uptime or customer reported data, but for us it was almost always Twitter. When I first started at Hulu, the biggest indicator that we were having a problem was people were blowing us up on Twitter. Customers were the best form of monitoring for us. Failure had unknown consequences. Someone would say, this is down. What does that mean? I have no clue. I have no idea what we're going to do. I don't even know what that's going to affect. So we had that. So this is kind of like where we started. Getting out of the reactive requires a divide and conquer. So we actually had to do this. So this is multiple times. My team would go and partner with other teams. Those teams would go and partner with other teams, and we acted more like the group that would pull each other together. We didn't come into it with an ego. It was very much like, hey, we're failing publicly. Looks bad on me, looks bad on you. What do you say we work together and get this sorted out? Then we kind of moved to this preventive. Now, there's 4 parts of this, and I'm gonna get to self-healing. We never really got to self-healing. It was the goal, right? It was constantly like the goal. So we kind of changed to this, where we would see a lot more observability. We brought Datadog and some other tools in. And we would say, all right, look, we're seeing some timeouts. Latency appears to be related to something downstream, oftentimes still not aware of like that 3rd layer down. Mitigation steps documented and rehearsed. So we started to kind of work on our runbooks. We started to think about automating our way out of those runbooks, and we became more self-aware and quicker. So those incidents on failure were starting to get closer to the symptom and the service escalation or remediation. So we became a lot more self-aware. We started to create shared responsibility between the engineering org, the security org, and the ops org. So instead of everybody firefighting in their silos, hey, let's all just go to the same place. Let's work on this together. Let's all bring relevant data into the context of firefighting and put this fire out. So we started to get to this point where observability increased, partnerships started to increase. Like, data was the language of partnership. It's a completely different talk, but our team built a ton of observability tools into the performance of our services, the reliability of our services, customer contacts about their experience on our service. We started to build a lot of tooling, and so we became part of this shared responsibility with all of these organizations. If you take nothing else from this, I'll just say, you don't require buy-in. Oftentimes I would hear, they're never gonna buy in. I don't know that that's necessary. What is necessary is to provide value. One of the things that we did is said, I ran the SRE team, so I would actually go out and say, you're struggling. We can see it. We can see it in the metrics. You're experiencing downtime. You're having to roll back 90% of the changes that you're making. I'll give you an SRE resource to help you sort this out. So it was more like a sub. And believe it or not, it was very successful. And ultimately, what that led us to was a little bit more predictive, because once I had my SRE team in there, I could understand the challenges that they were having. You have a development team or an engineering team that is building services for the product. They don't have a ton of time to build additional tooling to make my life easier, or my ops teams, or the broadcast operations teams. So I took that opportunity to say, cool, we'll help you with that. When my SRE team got in there and they started to help build these tools, guess what happened? We started to gain a lot more knowledge about those services. We also started to be able to build our own tooling. We didn't wait for buy-in. It was a partnership. So again, the predictive side is a little bit different. So we reached some level of operational maturity. Our average incident, went from, this is gonna sound awful, 6 to 7 hours to an hour, right? Again, just through better documentation, better automation. And then we anticipated failure. So we started to do war room planning. So we would take, let's say, a big event. I said the Super Bowl, but imagine it's, the conference finals, whatever. Bigger events that draw lots of viewers. Handmaid's Tale. So on the night that Handmaid's Tale launches, for example, I would look back through all of our incidents over the past 6 months and go, look, did we address these? We didn't do root cause analysis. I found it kind of silly. We looked at everything, like where was the opportunity for us to improve in this, in either communication, response, automation. There was a ton of things that we looked at. And so ultimately we kind of got to this part where we would do war rooming. We would go in and say, here are 6 months worth of incidents, small and large. How many of these things could be problematic for this huge tentpole event we're doing? And ultimately what would happen is, it was a room about this big actually. People would go, yeah, it's still gonna be a problem. So there was like this psychological trust thing where it was like, people were cool admitting that like, yeah, we would definitely fail again if this were to happen. What was awesome is like everybody kind of swarmed. So I could send my SRE team to help, I could engage with platform engineering, I could go to the engineering organization and say, this is gonna be a problem. What can we do to solve this? What can we do to shim this up? How can we not make this customer impacting? And it worked. So from a cultural standpoint, it was literally about building the culture of interdependency amongst all of these siloed groups. And then me coming in with value in the form of data or resources. And ultimately, what we got to, I don't know how many people in here I know, I see one, but we built a tool called Hulu Ops. Hulu Ops was phenomenal. I couldn't have done it without a lot of help. As a matter of fact, I tried to do it twice at different companies, but tried to get buy-in first, not necessary. Tried to get resources second, not necessary. Like you can actually borrow resources to solve these problems. So we got to a point where we built Hulu Ops. Anybody that knew Hulu Ops, you heard someone earlier talk about change management. We didn't have a cab, we didn't do any of that. If you had a change, you sent a webhook to our tool, Hulu Ops. We saw every change that took place, whether it was a config change and Launch Darkly, a Terraform build, we didn't care. Everything that happened. So we did 300 to 500 deployments a day. I had to do some analysis because, and I'll tie this in real quick, I had to do some analysis because we were told by the business side of the house, we want you to have a code freeze from this time to this time. And the reason was, we're gonna be reporting out our financials. We don't want any outages. And that felt very punitive for not a lot of incidents. I mean, at that point, we're having one major incident every 3 months. Like, that feels very punitive. But one of the metrics we tracked was, how many of these incidents are caused by change? It was like 70%. But on the grand scale of things, when you're doing 300 to 500 deployments a day, and you have one incident, it was like 0.0007% of all deployments actually cause a change. And it was like, this feels really punitive in this case. Like, we're really good at change. And so we kind of brought that into the mix. Like, we started to do a lot more chaos engineering. We started to do a lot more failure prediction and mitigation before an incident even started. So our language changed. It wasn't, this is failing. This might fail. We're seeing something that indicates an anomaly. There's anomalous data here. We should look into this now. So we got closer to the performance of our individual services. And surprises were rare. Generally, if something failed, we had kind of built this internal response for my team, which was symptom, service, and/or services, escalation, or remediation. We automated everything. I'll tell you, we wrote, about 3,000 different scripts that handled different anomalous information. We did it in an automation platform. Really empowered us, again, because we weren't reactive. These scripts were executable. We didn't hand run anything, but we ran them as those thresholds hit, and then we monitored. And it was fantastic. It literally changed the company. We went from, seriously, 6 to 7 hours of downtime per month to having like one major incident about every 3 months. And I think when I left Hulu, it was significantly less than that. As a matter of fact, I tried to look up Hulu outage and couldn't find one, so that's probably good. Obviously, they've gotten better without me there. So we got there, right? If you were to put this on, where are you on your automation journey? A big part of us getting there was automating. Communication was huge. If you're gonna go firefight in your silos, how about I just communicate to you that something's going on, you can do it in the same place. Maybe our mean time to acknowledge, if you're not in the mean time metrics, your time to acknowledge, your time to engage, your time to resolve, go down immediately just by everybody kind of being on the same page. And so we went through that. So we started with connecting our tools and then codifying the incident process. So we really nailed down the incident process, which unfortunately for who I had brought with me, I knew what kind of worked and I knew where we struggled. But the very first thing I did was automate our communication. I have the doc still, I still refer to it. It was awesome. I'll tell you a quick story. I worked with some really cool people, and they all have really cool titles at different companies, but I walked into a meeting one time, and it said, I agree, and it was the CTO at the time, said, I agree we need to solve this communication problem. We need for our executives to know something is going on. And I said, why don't we just add them in pager duty and we'll send them a text? And he said, you want to page executives? And I said, I don't have any other tools right now to be able to do this. We did not do that. That was the right decision, by the way. So what we did do is we created a group called the Executive on Duty. And generally these were our tech or engineering people. They were responsible for receiving those pages and then distilling that out to the business side of the group. So whether it was the CEO or other entities. Hulu had a weird relationship and was owned by like 4 different major studios at the time, so we had to also keep them involved. But we started there. We codified the incident process and the communication side. The other part of this was like, and this is the part, look, if I left Hulu for any reason, it's to come to Transposit because they work on this part, right? Like, you're not gonna hear me say a whole lot about the company Transposit, but like, automating the incident management piece, great. Everybody can start a Zoom chat or a Zoom video conference. Everybody can start a Slack channel. Everybody can do that. There's many incident management tools that do that, but what I really liked is there were also 10 things that we did after establishing the communications and the process that would have been infinitely helpful. For example, we went out, queried Salesforce for call data related to customer calls coming into our call center, into our customer care. That's not something that's normal. We just saw it as a great data set to pull into our incident management. Like, when you ask yourself, is this incident customer impacting? That's a pretty good indication. Like, yeah, we see a 10 times spike coming into our customer care. So that part was really interesting. Like, how can we automate this to bring all of that contextual information directly into the place that I'm starting this troubleshooting effort? And then we created simple service request workflows. So how can I do this? Can we do this? Can I start this? Can we scale this? We started a process that was an intake that resulted in automation. When I say human in the loop, by the way, not everything has to have a trigger. It's not like, oh, I've got this alert, let me do this action automatically. Sometimes it was, here's a trigger, here are 3 potential actions that I could take. One just a little bit worse than the other, better, worse, but I want to make a human-in-the-loop decision based on contextual information outside of that. And I'll give you a quick example. We had a failure one time, again in the NFL, during an NFL game. One of the things that's interesting, you have sometimes 2 bad choices. We could kick 30,000 people out of a stream to make it better, or we could just let it ride out, and at the end of that game, we were going to dump about 130,000. Tough decision. I won't tell you which one we made, because in case you're a Hulu customer, I don't want you to feel like I've opened up too much. But you have to make those decisions sometimes. That human-in-the-loop automation piece, it's like I have something that I can automate, but I still need to make a human decision as to which one is the lesser of 2 evils. So we started to use insights and analytics to improve and expand our automation. Anything that generally took time or potentially had the possibility of becoming impactful to a customer, we took the opportunity to say, we're going to automate at least some part of this, whether it was the observability piece, whether it was early detection, or just contextual information. So we didn't go like, oh, but we can't automate this. That was never the answer. It's like, this has to be a manual task. We could automate 3 things. The last 5 things might need to be manual. But we made those decisions. And what was interesting is that as we started to make those decisions, it was just, our motto was kind of like, let's just get started. As we got those first 3 things done, that 4th thing became a little bit more approachable. We learned more about the service. We learned more about the different things that were operating that service. And so we also were able to potentially influence the product lifecycle, because we could go back and actually say, if we did this, we would avoid this problem, or we could resolve this more easily. And then, of course, deeper partnership. Like, if I have anything to add to this, That was our superpower. I enabled everybody on my team, regardless of their title, to go have a conversation. The last thing I wanted to do was be a gatekeeper. I wanted them to actually go out and establish those partnerships and have those conversations. And I'll be honest, I inherited to some degree like a traditional operations team. And I started to focus on like junior engineering people that had applied into the company but had not gotten jobs in our engineering organization. I started to focus on those folks and say, hey, here's one thing you can do on the ops team. You're gonna work with every single engineering team in our organization. You're gonna provide value to those teams. You're gonna get to pick and choose kind of the team that you think you could go to, and it worked. Like we brought a little bit a few junior engineers in. We allowed them to kind of see the landscape, get that experience of working on different teams, different tools, and then those teams actually came back and were like, hey, what's John up to? We'd love to have John on our team. But they brought a skill set. So I had network engineers, I had software engineers. I had a lot of different skill sets, and it was awesome to be able to sub them out and then see them become coveted within the company. So deeper partnership allowed us to actually increase the number of people that could leave our team and go join bigger teams, or teams that were more focused on the things they were interested in. And then auto remediation and self-service. So again, if you're taking all of this and you're going, all right, cool, we've automated the first 3 steps of this thing that we do manually all the time, and we can automate these last 4, you get into a situation where you're there. Now, when I say that we never reached like this level 4 level, we got pretty close. There was a lot of things that we did really well in this space. Scale was one of those things. Not all of our services were capable of auto-scaling for different reasons. But based on some different rule sets, we were able to automate some piece of that. We were also able to automate a lot of downscaling too. So after major events, based on some external metric, say concurrent viewership, you could actually start to tail off a little bit. So we started to take some different steps that were really, really interesting and very impactful. One, to the business money side of things. When you're constantly not running hot and you're scaling down during these slow times, obviously there's some cost savings there. But also from the perspective of not having to fine-tune your scaling on the engineering side. It was just like a stopgap. So we did a really good job there. It's hard. I would say like that probably shouldn't be your goal. I think probably level 3 is the goal, and if you can get to level 4, awesome. I think level 3 is kind of the sweet spot. So before I go on any further, sorry about that earlier, guys. I literally had a moment and had to go get a drink, so if you weren't in here, you missed it, but I appreciate your patience, and I could see everybody's kind of back engaged. To say that everything in LA now ends at Disney, I just wanted to tell a very quick story. I left Hulu as Disney was coming in, but this morning I have a son, and he started a new job. And I said, hey, you know, you're working in Glendale. Why don't you ride with me? I'll drop you off. My son, very communicative, very. How's the new job? Okay. How are the people? Okay. Great, great conversation. I feel like we've spent a lot of time, we've made some real progress here. I left Disney. I've heard Disney 10 times since I've been here. We get in the car and I said, what is the address of your new job? And he says, 1401 Flower. And we pulled up, and it's the Imagineering office, and I was like, dude, all roads lead to Disney, including the one I'm on right now, on the way to go do this talk. So anyway, all roads lead to Disney, I guess. So best practices and solutions to driving operational maturity today, things you can do today. Enable that human-in-the-loop automation, right? Like, this is a big part of it. You don't have to have a trigger and then an automation. There are lots of platforms out there. I happen to work for one of them. I'll let you do your own research. But again, it's like if you can get that to that incremental spot where you're potentially either bringing contextual information into the work that you already do to establish a manual task, start there. That's totally fine. If you're doing a lot of work in Slack and someone's asking you for something or you need to take some action, it is completely acceptable to bring the thing into Slack at the time that you need it. You know, think cloud-centric ops. So bring that human-in-the-loop automation piece into this. Start with a simple thing, build on it. Look, this is more conversation afterwards. I'm going to go back to this one. Anybody using like an automation low-code platform? Cool. Yeah, I mean, again, I say lean into low-code. My company, Hulu, was a buy or a build company. So almost every single tool we use, we built. Until the point that became too difficult to maintain. And so what we started to do was, we had a build or buy conversation about everything. Do we have this core, is this part of our core competency? Should we build this? If the answer was no, then we generally went out to the marketplace to see what was available. So I leaned into the low-code side of automation, using different tools. Enhance cross-team collaboration. Told you it was the very first thing I did when I got to Hulu. I noticed that everybody worked on something, nobody talked to each other. So basically what we did was literally bring the development teams in, the security teams in, the operations teams in, brought them into the same space so that they could collaborate. There was some mention earlier of the security side of things, and I operate in a trust and verify model. I have no intent of holding a cab. I mean, again, this is me. I don't really have interest in like the heavy process for the purposes of kind of making sure boxes are checked. Trust and verify. So we would generally run our own internal audit on different changes that were taking place and say, yes, this meets our criteria. But we would also establish guardrails so people couldn't deviate too much from the happy path. Continuous feedback loops. So you only get better when you're actually talking about these things. One of the things that was very important for us, after every incident, we actually had a post-incident review. We called it a post-incident review. You might call it a post-mortem. No one died. Like, let's not be dramatic about it. It was just an opportunity to get better at stuff. Like, again, I'm kind of partial on this. Like, post-incident review probably shouldn't be punitive either. I mean, if someone's getting escorted out of a building because they unplugged something or deployed something, probably not for you. You know what I mean? But take advantage of, this continuous feedback loop. We failed. We've decoupled failure from the incident. Like, yeah, cool, we failed. We'll figure that out. We'll solve for that. We'll get better. But you can auto-record that human and machine data, which you heard John Willis talking about earlier. You can do that. Slack's probably your place. Teams is probably your place. You're probably capturing all of that information already. Now what do you do with it? How can you make it actionable? There are a lot of tools that do that as well. Context is key. So you obviously have the context now of that incident. You're bringing those graphs into Slack. You're bringing operational information from other teams into your incident response or your just task or request response. And then this was me. I don't have this slide. I almost wish I did. I had a guy that worked for me named Steve Stevens. It's an awesome name, right? Steve Stevens. I'm Ryan. No, Steve Stevens was my advocate. So he actually was responsible for the war room activities, establishing those higher level relationships with our engineering organization. I think it's huge. It was great. So the one thing that I took from him that I still say to this day is, when we decouple failure from incident, he would say, oh, looks like we have the opportunity to get better. And I was like, so cheesy. So one day we were getting in an elevator, and he became known as like the opportunity guy. So everything he said was like, oh, looks like we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity. We're going to get coffee. We have the opportunity to get coffee. So I was getting in the elevator, and he was literally telling me as we were getting in the elevator, he goes, dude, you need a brand. I was like, I don't need a brand. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And we stepped into the elevator, and there were two people there. I'd never seen these people before. And they go, you're the opportunity guy. And Steve just turned like, yeah. And so, again, like, for whatever it's worth, like, having that advocate role internal to your company is extremely powerful. He had no interest in being right, wrong. All he wanted to do was make us better, to take advantage of those opportunities. So if you have someone on your team, and you probably call them a problem manager, if you're old school ITSM, ITIL, might call them problem managers, might have someone, think about that advocacy role. thinking about that person becoming an advocate for the operations and the development teams or the DevOps process as a whole. It was huge for us. Plus, he went on The Price is Right. I let him have the day off. He was on The Price is Right, and they held up the microphone. He actually got on there and got to spin the wheel. And he got up there, and he said, I want to say thanks to Ryan Taylor, the best boss in the world. Dude, at that moment, he could do no wrong for me, man. He thanked me before his husband, before his kids. I was like, yeah, man, I won. So he was awesome. So balance engineering skill set with self-service. You heard me talk about this, like I really went after this. I never focused on solely ops folks. I never focused solely on engineering folks to kind of run this combined SRE org. I really did like focus on people that were passionate about specific parts of the infrastructure, and really junior engineers. And if you find me on LinkedIn, you can see an article I wrote. I actually met someone in a bar. I don't hang out in bars, I just happened to be in one. But I met a guy, and he said, I've applied for Hulu multiple times. And I was like, what was the result of that? He's like, no interview, no nothing. Brought him in for an interview to be part of our SRE organization. He's still there today. He's a fantastic, again, just there's opportunity in these junior roles that can happen, on an SRE side or on the ops side if you have those separate. But again, kind of lead into that skill set, the engineering skill set, even on an ops team. And then self-service. If you can build a platform or use a platform that allows people to start a process by which you finish through some version of automation or some part of automation, it'll be huge for you. So low-code dev platform, make self-service user-friendly. So if people work in Slack, build in Slack. If people work in Jira, build in Jira. Make that the connective tissue that pulls all this together. Bonus point for using connective tissue in a speech or in a prezo. Workflows with guardrails. Ultimately, the guardrails was a big part of what we were doing, right? We didn't allow people to do things that could be potentially destructive, and so where possible, we established guardrails so that they couldn't deviate too much from that, and that applied across almost all of our infrastructure, but even in the process in which we responded, right? We didn't allow people to do anything destructive as we knew it, but if they did, it was a learning opportunity. We had an opportunity not to do destructive stuff later, and we would solve it then and establish more guardrails. That is it, minus the small hiccup at the front. Thank you, guys. We have some time. Do I have any questions for me? Yeah. Yeah. I'll repeat it too. Yeah. So the question was, he's starting the automation journey to solve a communications problem. Do you lean into the no-code? So you said you're using Power Automate. Do you lean into the no-code solution to that problem? Do we have time? Yeah. Do we lean into that problem, or should we have taken advantage of potentially another tool to solve that? Fair? Yeah. I don't think you have to grow out of no code if it solves the potential problem. And it could be both, actually. You could build to accommodate no code tools, which is kind of what we did as well. We built a significant amount of infrastructure that took advantage of the back ends or the front ends of other things. That sounded like a riddle, by the way. We built on top of ServiceNow. Not one person on my team had access to ServiceNow, to be fair. We used it as a back end. We executed everything as, this is my source of truth, my record of truth. And the front end was completely built by us, specific for our use case. So to give you an example, yeah, there was some no-code, low-code opportunity there, but our tool sat on top of ServiceNow. So completely different conversation, happy to have it, but I think What Hulu built internally was some version of Jira, ServiceNow, was also some version of Backstage. So we had some internal stuff. So we just had a ton of tools that we built internal that set on top of much larger tools. So no is the answer. You don't have to. You don't have to deviate from that. Questions for me? Awesome. Cool. Say that one more time.
Yeah. Can you speak a little more to like your time at Hulu, like how big your team was and how long?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the question was, how big was my team? How long did it take me? I had to hire 8 people to run a broadcast operation team for live TV in literally 2 months and get them up to speed. I didn't have dev resources. I strictly had the broadcast ops team. And I made friends with a couple of engineers. I told them that I would empower them to have extra free time if they were willing to donate some engineering resources to my team. That guy's name is Corey Finger. He's worked for me at Hulu. He's worked for me at Transposit. It was not long before he eventually just became part of my team, though it was never like official. And then once I had him, then I had a whole team. And by a whole team, my SRE team was 4 people, huge, in a company of 4,000 people and $10 billion in ad revenue. Huge SRE team, but effective nonetheless. So it was very small. 8 people that were dedicated ops, 3 people that were dedicated to SRE, and 1 borrowed resource that was semi-dedicated to the SRE role. That's probably why we chose like the centralized sub-team as opposed to granting people a resource, an SRE resource based on need and or maturity. When you only have 4, you can't sub out a whole lot.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that.
We can talk.